Hello, everybody. It's Arjun Dev Arora, the founder and managing partner of Valence Advisory. We support funds and founders and help accelerate their efforts via people, strategy, and capital. And now off to John.
Hi, John Lowe here. I'm the co-founder and advisor, partner in crime to Arjun Dev Arora at Valence Advisory. But I think that's enough about us. Today we have a wonderful guest. Her name's Monique Woodard. And Monique, welcome. And why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a bit about what you've been up to these days.
Thank you. I'm Monique Woodard. I'm based in San Francisco, and I'm the founding partner and managing director of a venture capital firm called Cake Ventures. So I basically spend most of my time investing in and discovering great founders and then helping them be successful.
Wow. And Monique, you've had quite a diverse and extensive career spanning many sectors. So how did you discover this thing called venture? And, what got you hooked into getting involved?
Yeah, I didn't grow up in a place where anyone knew anything about venture capital. I grew up in a super rural town in Florida, Central Florida. And, my grandfather was a farmer and I grew up on a farm basically. And my dad worked fire and rescue for NASA. My mom worked for AT&T. So super working class family. But I am an only child and, got really into computers early. And my dad bought me my first computer when I was 8 or so, which then meant that he had to drive me into town for these programming classes. And sort of became self-taught because there were no computer classes in my middle school and high school. But then I started teaching myself HTML. And back in the early aughts, it wasn't really even called starting a startup. It was I'm going to build something on the internet and then I'm going to use growth hacking and performance marketing techniques to make that thing get popular and make money. And I got really good at doing that. And that sort of led me into a more tech focused career. A company based in San Francisco knew of me, knew that I was good at building product, asked me to come out and talk to them. I was out here for 36 hours and I moved 30 days later. And I've been in San Francisco ever since. And I would say that really kicked off the Silicon Valley part of my career. I was at that company for a couple of years, left to build a mobile app in the mobile shopping space. Also started community founders called Black Founders because we weren't seeing it was 2011 or so, and there was no diversity in the Valley at that time. And so, that really sort of catalyzed my interest in working with founders closely. And ultimately I decided that I was I discovered that I was sort of doing the job of a VC, but without the actual money behind me to actually invest in companies. So I was you got to fix that. And that's how I ended up moving on to the investor side of the table at 500 Startups, started investing out of their seed program, did some investing in sub-Saharan Africa. And and from there, it was sort of, that became my life as an investor and as a person who works closely with founders.
Wow, what a journey. Thanks for sharing that, Monique. And, you mentioned you were doing, performing the role of a VC without the actual money, and you had to do something about that. Once you did do something about that, you worked with quite an amazing number of founders, at a stage when, the VC ecosystem was arguably very different to what it is today. Mm-hmm. What are some of the memorable or meaningful highlights of that time you spent in VC? Because I would say you're one of the diverse venture capitalists and investors who really had insight into what it was like to work in that environment before diversity became a popular thing,
Yeah, I think the conversation around diversity has really changed. And now, even, this year in the wake of George Floyd and all of the protests, the conversation has changed even more. And now you've got venture firms saying that Black Lives Matter, which was never a thing. So that's a huge change. And, they're sort of ramping up their efforts to support Black founders and also support Black fund managers. And so there's been a true shift. And I'm hoping that's a long lasting shift because, when I started to support founders and work closely with founders, you would introduce them to you would introduce Black founders to Sand Hill Road VCs and it would sort of go nowhere, right? They weren't getting the same level of support and capital that their non-Black peers were. And so I think over time that's certainly changed. I mean, Deshaun Amira from Maven, I know Deshaun from day zero of him starting Maven, and he went on to do 500 startups, and then Andreessen invested in him, and then Rich Lou Dennis, the founder of Shea Moisture, invested in him. And so it's really sort of evolved in a way that I think Black founders can get a lot of support. And, to put a clear perspective on it, back when I started, there were really very few Black people in venture, right? There were very few, there was Charles Hudson, and that was it. and it's so funny. Sometimes I'll get on the phone with someone and they're like, do you know Charles Hudson? I'm like, yeah, I do. I know Charles Hudson.
That's funny. Charles is great. We love Charles.
We love Charles. But yes, you can't be in this business and not know Charles Hudson. So, there were very, very few Black VCs, and now we're starting to see this whole new Black fund manager class come to market with these interesting funds and interesting models. And I think that's a really good thing for the industry. So I'm excited by that change.
Oh, thank you for sharing. Wow, such an interesting backstory, right? And being one of the first in the early days of venture, aside from Charles, you too were
you
there.
Make me sound so old. I'm
well, we'll talk about it. And it's like dog years because 1 year in SV is 7 years of progress, right? Yeah. But it's interesting coming from arguably new and fresh lens approach to venture because you didn't come from a traditional background, whether it was an educational background upbringing. What did you see in those days that others just completely overlooked in terms of vetting founder quality or insights into markets that most people have potentially blinkers on or biases that inhibit their capacity to see opportunity?
Yeah, I was definitely seeing them ignore founders who didn't fit the pattern, right? Didn't go to Stanford, but maybe they went to an HBCU, they went to Howard, right? And I think early on, a lot of traditional investors just didn't know how to evaluate those founders. And so they were discounting those founders. They were like, oh, that person didn't go to Stanford or doesn't have this education. You're like, wait, but they went to Howard University, which is an amazing HBCU. So I think part of it was being able to understand and recognize what a good founder looked like outside of the package that everyone else had, become accustomed to seeing. And then the second part of it was, really understanding, one of the things I talk about a lot is that the world itself is changing. And one of the changes is this rise of a new majority where people of color are going to become the majority in the United States pretty soon. And that's mostly Black, Latinx, and Asian people will be the majority in the US. And so if you think about that, that means a massive shift to the internet user base. And that's one of the things that I started talking about and thinking about really early. So I'm an early investor in a company like Blavity, which is a media platform for Black millennials. They were actually my first deal at 500 startups. So New Morgan invested in that company early. Also an angel investor in Minted Cosmetics, a beauty brand for women of color. And so it was really, those investments were all about sort of seeing where the world was moving to and, skating to where the puck is going in my investments. And I think that people are still not quite a lot of investors are still not quite recognizing how deeply this change is going to affect what people want to buy, the way that they want to use the internet, and the things that they are going to adopt when it comes to technology. And so that's really, I think, sort of one of my superpowers is like looking and understanding like this change to demographics is going to really change everything that we know about technology. And then like putting an investor lens on that and saying, okay, well, if that's true, then these are the things that we should be investing in.
Oh, so well said. Like on point with your brand tagline, right? Investing where we're going, not where we've been.
Exactly. Yeah,
So
totally.
just giving Cake VC a plug there, everyone. Just remember. That's so fascinating. And so, being in ventures sometimes now, like now that you saw these trends well before others, and it's still arguably even early days now, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the opportunities to disrupt, or what are some of the possibilities you see for the world that you're super excited about, given where these trends are going,
Yeah. I mean, I'm super excited about the aging market. That's a huge market opportunity that I think people are only now starting to understand how big the aging market is and how influential boomers are today, but how influential millennials and Gen X will be as they get older, right? And so previously, like the aging market was under innovated and definitely underinvested. And now we're starting to see like these new crop of startups come to market with these new products that are totally targeted at this aging demographic. And it can be anywhere from helping people age in place to helping them think through retirement and benefits to helping them think through like if older people want to remain in the workforce, and a lot of them do, what are the support systems that they're going to need from HR and from management in order to actually do that, right? And so that's one of the big areas that I'm super excited about. I wrote a white paper on aging called Gray New World. I'm also really interested in sort of the influence of the female dollar on companies. Basically, there are now a number of companies that are driving to billion-dollar outcomes based on the economic power of women. And so The Real is a really good one because they just recently did an IPO, but now we're also going to start to see it outside of e-commerce into other categories. So I think that's like one area where I see a lot of opportunity that I think is still relatively untapped by most VCs.
So well said. And I think Arjun and I can attest to that trend as well. But, curious from your point of view, is like, what assumption limits the speed of new VCs actually seeing the size of this opportunity? Or what is it or what insight aren't they aware of that would actually help them really put their attention more to this space and realize like first of all, how important it is. But number two, like how like untapped the opportunities are.
Yeah, I still think that a lot of VCs, especially Silicon Valley VCs, there's a whole world and a whole, if we're just talking about the US, there's a whole, other part of the country out there of people who don't have Silicon Valley problems, right? They have Midwest problems. They've got Iowa problems. They've got rural Florida problems, right? And there's this big opportunity there to solve those problems, which arguably is a much bigger market than continuing to solve for Silicon Valley backyard problems. And I think it can be really hard for you to sort of like lift yourself up and lift your head up out of Silicon Valley and what we think is really cool, and look at, what does a mom of three in Peoria, like it's that old radio saying, like, does it play in Peoria, right? Like, do people in Peoria like listen to this? And so like, does a mom of four in Peoria need, I won't call it any startups, but like
insert hyped up Silicon Valley
right.
up here,
right?
Do
they need this thing, or do they need something else, right? What are they thinking about, and what are their needs, and what are the problems that you're going to solve for her, or what does this truck driver in Ocala, Florida need? Like, what are their problems, and how can we solve those? And, I think that if we start to think about the world in a much broader way and sort of lift ourselves out of like the immediacy of Silicon Valley. And this goes for both investors and founders, right? It goes for both. Then there are much, much bigger market opportunities for us to address and for us to get excited about.
So well said. And I'm just going to pause and like absorb that for a bit before we pivot. But, you've had such a rich insight both on the operational end and arguably been an innovator in a lot of the career paths that you've taken to get to where you are today. You self-taught yourself coding, right, or programming, and then you decided to move out to the Valley, like after spending 36 hours in the Bay.
Yeah.
And then working in startups and realizing, hey, I'm solving a VC problem. Okay, I can just let's pop over to VC, solve that problem. It
wasn't quite that quick though. Like
no, great, yeah. Sure. Well, that which leads me to the next question. That's if one were to look at like your career pathway, you could easily like deduce that you would have needed a strong growth mindset to pull that off. And what are some of the things that you learned about yourself or that you have to learn through experience along the way that really helped you keep continuing that career evolution and never, for better words, use of words, like not stay stagnant,
Yeah. I mean, it's really out of pure necessity, right? Because like, I don't think I'm ever going to be the sort of person who like wants to keep doing the same thing in the same way over and over and over again. Like now the rest of my career will be about investing, but I intend to like innovate the way that it's being done. I think my career path has just always been about like waking up every day and even when it's hard, just not giving up. Like it's honestly, it's like pure stubbornness, basically. It's like purely being like stubborn and like even when there are massive roadblocks, you just like keep working at it, keep working at it, keep working at it. And at some point, like the wall breaks, right? And you're like, yeah, I knew that wall was going to break. Like, and eventually it does, My dad used to always say, pressure bust pipes, like put enough pressure, like pressure bust pipes. So it's like that level of just doggedness and going after something is really what it takes to make any sort of career, especially one in venture, because venture is hard. It's hard to get into, it's hard to stay in, it's hard to be successful. And I think, there are always people who will have like these opinions of like what you should be doing in your life or with your career. But I mean, my goal is to be the best investor. And that's not even like the best Black investor or the best woman investor or the best Black woman investor. No, I want to be the best investor, period. And you can't get there if you are doing what other people want you to do, right? You can't get there if you are taking the path that other people think that you should be taking for your life. You've got to like blaze this path where there is no path probably. And you got to do it in the way that, is totally yours. And that's the only way you're going to get to, some level of like, what is the best.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that. It's so clear. And, respecting confidentiality, what are some of the exciting walls we can expect to crack in what you're doing now and in the immediate future? Because like Arjun and I are super excited about that.
Yeah. I'm very excited about Cake Ventures and, what the role of Cake Ventures will be in having, another seed fund in the market. I'm really thinking about it beyond it just being a fund that makes investments, right? A fund is certainly an investment vehicle, but this fund, I think, is so much more than that. There's the opportunity to set culture both internally to the fund, but also that external culture setting is incredibly important. I've already invested in some great entrepreneurs, in my career, and I think that those entrepreneurs and those companies that they're building are going to be the companies that everyone is going to be using. And it's really the opportunity to set the future of the consumer landscape. And so the landscape is changing. And I think a lot of people don't really recognize it as it's happening. But these founders and by extension, hopefully I recognize it quite a bit, are going to be the ones that are reaping the benefits and changing the culture of what it means to, like, teach your kids bilingual language skills, or what it means to buy jewelry online, or what it means to consume media. And so I think that there are these huge opportunities that are going to be happening. And I'm really excited about Cake Ventures as a fund, but also Cake Ventures as a culture setting company and organization.
Wow, very exciting. And if you could share, what are some of the values or traits that you would say define the Cake Ventures team? And obviously that's going to grow over time, but
yeah.
Just so that for our audience, like for the people out there who may not know of you yet, or who do, what are some things that define a Cake Ventures cultural fit?
Yeah, I think the number one thing, and I mean, you can probably guess this because the culture is top down. The culture starts with me, right? And the number one thing that I look for in people, whether that's a founder or someone to join the Cake Ventures Fund team, is resiliency, right? Someone who can get knocked down today and then wake up tomorrow and they're standing up and they've figured their way around whatever knocked them down the day before. And so someone who can do that over and over and over again is the sort of person that I want to invest in, right? And it almost doesn't matter like what they're doing as much as like the fact that I can be confident that if it doesn't work today, they're going to figure out something that does work tomorrow. So that's like the number one thing that I look for is resiliency and the ability to just keep showing up and keep giving 110% until it works.
Oh, so well said. Arjun and I say that we like looking for the founder who smiles at all the hard things they know they have to do.
Yeah. I like to say, like, I look for people who can take a punch in the mouth and like keep going.
Keep going.
Yeah. So that's the in-person partner meeting if you're a founder. The test.
It's Fight Club in here.
Oh wow. Well, thanks, Monique. We've got to respect time. We're almost at the end, but I want to give you an opportunity to share any final words, whether that's for the broader ecosystem, for founders of VCs, or any future people who want to partner with you, just to close this video segment up.
I encourage people to reach out. You can find me on Twitter a lot, probably too much, at Monique Woodard. Or, you can reach out to me. My website is monique.vc. Also, cake.vc is the website for Cake. And, I'm always interested in hearing from great founders and working with other investors who also share the same beliefs in resiliency and culture setting, and like that there are these new markets that we need to be figuring out and looking toward.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Monique. Appreciate it.
Thank you.